I now invite the leader of the Indian National Congress delegation, Shri Rahul Gandhi, to make a statement.
Srimati Sonia Gandhi, Chairperson of the conference, Dr. Manmohan Singh Ji, former Prime Minister of India, His Excellency Hamid Karzai, former President of Afghanistan, His Excellency John Kufuor, former President of Ghana, Her Majesty Ashidorji Wangchuk, Queen Mother of Bhutan, Ahmad Muhammad Kathrada, the famous freedom fighter, Olusegun Obasanjo, former President of Nigeria, His Excellency Sher Bahadur Dauba from Nepal, His Excellency Madhav K. Nepal, also from Nepal, Anand Sharma Ji, Mukul Vasnik Ji, Manishankar Iyer Ji, other leaders from various parties, delegates, invitees and friends, I would like to welcome all of you here. Two nights ago, I was sitting in my home preparing my notes for this address, and I wished very much that instead of just speaking to you, we could all go together and see some of Nehru's India. I wished I could have taken you to the birthplace of Allahabad and the great wheat fields that feed this great country. I wished that instead of just talking over here, we could have all gone to Naini jail, where Jawaharlal Nehru was imprisoned along with so many brave Indians during our freedom movement, and where he learned some of his life's greatest and deepest lessons. And then I thought, okay, if I can't take them to these places, at least we should all go to Teen Murti House, where he lived, where we could see how much of himself he gave to this country, where we could see how simply Jawaharlal Nehru lived. But this, unfortunately, is a two-day conference. So you'll all have to promise me that you're going to come back and we can go together to see some of these places. So I'd like to start by reading you something I read 2 days ago. Something that shows you a little bit about Jawaharlal Nehru. This comes from his will and last testament. I have been attached to the Ganga and Yamuna rivers in Allahabad ever since my childhood. And as I have grown older, this attachment has also grown. The Ganga, especially, is the river of India, beloved of her people. She has been a symbol of India's culture and civilization, ever changing, ever flowing, and yet ever the same Ganga. She reminds me of the snow-covered peaks and the deep valleys of the Himalayas, which I have loved so much, and of the rich and vast plains below, where my life and work have been cast. Though I have discarded much of past tradition and custom, and am anxious that India should rid herself of all shackles that bind and constrain her and divide her people, and suppress vast numbers of them, and prevent the free development of the body and spirit. Though I seek all this, yet I do not wish to cut myself off from that past completely. I am proud of that great inheritance that has been and is ours. And I am conscious that I too, like all of us, am a link in that unbroken chain which goes back in the dawn of history, in the immemorial past of India. It was this desire, this deep desire to become one with his country, that led Nehru to ask that his ashes be scattered over the Ganga and over the fields that I spoke to you about. We'd like to welcome you to Nehru's India. Nehru himself is an ancient idea, as old as the great rivers and fields of this country he loved so very much. He's an ancient idea, yes, but he's also a part of living India. His ideas and his politics are very much present here today. Even though there are those that are trying to erase him, to rub him out from history, to remove his legacy from the country he so dearly treasured and helped build. Nehru understood that there was no separation between him and India. There was no distance between him, its land, and nature. Indira Gandhi once wrote that her father was absolutely furious when in May 1953 he was told that Mount Everest has been conquered. He told her, Mount Everest can be climbed, but Mount Everest can never ever be conquered. Nehru saw no distinction between India's people and himself. Nehru tried to merge with India, and India in turn merged with Nehru. Nehru's idea of India as a country where 1 billion people choose their destiny and live in harmony. India is a country where democratic principles are cherished deeply. The poorest person in India understands what democracy is. Nehru developed and protected these democratic ideals, and that is why today India is a nation where 1/6 of humanity lives in peace. I thank all of you for joining us today, because it is especially important that we preserve this India, this peaceful India, this India that lives in harmony, Nehru's India, an India that is secular and tolerant. Today, this legacy that has denied no man or woman their voice, and that we have preserved, all of us have preserved and fought for close to 70 years, is more important than ever before. Nehru resonated with his countrymen because he was an expression of their way of thinking. Nehru was a man of ideas, but he was never an ideologue. He never forced his ideas onto anybody. He was a beacon to millions of Indians, and indeed to the world, because he represented freedom. Nehru's fight was for all of mankind, and that is why Nehru's imprint is felt not just in India, but across the world. Many people in Nehru's generation fought against imperialism. Imperialism at the time was the suffocating norm. It was what the powerful and rich world believed was their right over countries like ours, over people like us. To fight against imperialism in those days, when the entire weight of the world was stacked against you, meant one had to believe really deeply in freedom. It took Nehru a lifetime of struggle to understand and absorb an idea that he loved, to really see what freedom meant from the heart. Most people think that freedom is just the ability to act. You can do what you want, I'll do what I want. But freedom cannot be truly understood without an intimate experience of what the absence of liberty feels like, without the humiliation of what a lack of freedom feels like. When Nehru was freed from Naini jail, he was asked by his captors to sign their visitor's book. And what Nehru wrote was this. He thanked the British for imprisoning him. He thanked them because he learnt in jail. He thanked them for removing hatred and anger from his mind. Nehru left jail a completely free man. You can be in jail for many years. You can be in shackles and then be released into the world after your sentence has been served. And you can still walk away in chains. Carrying your anger with you transports your prison everywhere with you. As the poet Samuel Qasim once wrote in his famous poem, End of a Talk with a Jailer, from the narrow windows of my small cell, I see trees that are smiling at me, and rooftops crowded with my family, and windows weeping and praying for me. From the narrow window of my small cell, I can see your big cell. Nehru spent 3,262 days in prison. And he understood that it is not the simple removal of the chains that make you free. It's how you react to the world after it has been cruel to you. Nehru walked away from jail a free man, and even Winston Churchill, who had long opposed him, fought him, said that Nehru was a man who had conquered hate and fear. But back to the present. Today, what I find really disturbing is how we can condemn people because the ideas they treasure are not our own. Nehru understood deeply that everyone is entitled to their viewpoint. Nehru gave space for his opposition. Even when they were practically non-existent, he reached out to them, spoke to them. At the time when the opposition was sparse in parliament, he gave them a feeling that while electorally they may be weak, in his world they were valued partners in nation building. Nehru recognized that every single perspective is unique, even those he fought vehemently. He defended the rights of those he did not agree with and never ever imagined silencing them. When Nehru was at the peak of his powers, when he was loved by everyone in India, someone wrote a letter to one of the big newspapers. And the letter was signed, it was an anonymous letter, and it was signed Chanakya, who's a historical figure in India. And the letter said that Nehru is loved in India. Everybody believes in Nehru. And this is going to go to Nehru's head. Nehru says he's a Democrat. But with all this praise, all this adoration, Nehru is going to become a dictator. And a few months later, the real author of the letter was revealed. And the author was Jawaharlal Nehru himself. It was Nehru's ability to question, to stop and ask, to understand what was going on, rather than his desire to speak, that was one of his greatest strengths. We have spoken about democracy here, but true democratization is not simply the right to vote. It is about the devolution of power. It is about handing power to the weakest person in the room. It is about believing that when we hand power to the weakest person in the room, he will act in everybody's interest. It is about believing that when you give space to the weakest person, he has the capability to take this country forward. Democracy is an act of faith. It is not simply a physical process that takes place every 5 years. You know, today we take what we have for granted. We have elections every 5 years. But India could have gone in a completely different direction. That it became a liberal democracy, committed to the rule of law, to the independence of the judiciary, to the independence of my friends here, the press, was in overwhelming measure due to the first Prime Minister of this country. Here in India, as Manishankar Ayyar ji said, 3 million locally elected representatives run our villages and towns. And out of those 3 million, and this makes me really proud, out of those 3 million, half are women. It was the planning and vision of Nehru and his compatriots and colleagues that gave 1 out of 6 people on earth, the right to choose their own destiny. This is why India proudly stands where it does today. Europe took half a century, 2 world wars, millions of dead people, destroyed cities, smashed families to build a democratic structure. India, with 3 times the number of people, built a democratic foundation through a non-violent movement. No world wars, no violence. What Nehru's generation built for India is what he deeply wished to see in the world around his country. Nehru's leadership was one of inclusion and compassion, not force, not violence. Nehru did not believe that legitimacy could ever come from the act of violence. Legitimacy for Nehru could only come from compassion, conversation, and listening to and understanding deeply what the other person is saying. As Nehru said, peace is not a relationship of nations. It is a condition of the mind brought about by a serenity of the soul. Peace is not merely the absence of war. It is also a state of mind. Lasting peace can only come to peaceful people. We have a tendency to worship great men. When we do that, we cast them in stone. We freeze them in time. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that Nehru was a great man. But more than a man, Nehru was a dynamic way of thinking, constantly evolving, forever compassionate. So let us not diminish Nehru, but let us learn from him. Let us learn to stand up for what we truly believe is correct. No matter what the cost, no matter what the opposition, we should stand up for the truth. Let us cast aside the dead weight of hatred and intolerance. Let us learn from Nehru's example and give ideas the freedom to flow. Let us never suppress an idea simply because it did not originate from us. Thank you.